Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I guess Antony, I think the reason that we're here together is both of us are very interested in how art lives in the world, in systems other than museums and galleries, which of course are very important to the art world, but what is the meaning of all of this? How do we connect to ourselves, to others, to a place, to times before, time after, time beyond? And Antony and I share a lot of things in common. So we come to sculpture, very much through the body. So my background before I studied art was dance. And for Antony, you were a student of meditation, of anthropology, of archaeology. And when we talked about this, we both spent some formative years of our youth in India. I started to see the work differently. Of course, the work is very personal. It's very much about your body, but it's really about that space within. And you said something really beautiful, and I'm not going to quote yourself to you, but about appearance and who owns appearance. Could we maybe go into that a little bit, Antony?
Yeah, I guess, first of all, it's just really special to be in this place, having this conversation with this person and with all of you. Because I think, this is a house of memory in a way, and you ask yourself in entering it, this is a place where I can, in present time, go into conversations with people across time through made things. And I guess, to answer that difficult question about appearance, I suppose I'm aware that we live in a world where the visual turn, as Tom Mitchell talked about it, has overcome everything. 70% of our perceptions are now qualified visually. But I think in many ways, the way that we look belongs to the world, not to us. We live on the other side of appearance. And I think that's what I've made my work to be about, trying to talk about what it feels like to dwell in that bit of the material world that we all dwell in, which is on loan to us from the systems of exchange that surround us in an unfolding world. And you might think that that's a very strange thing to make a sculpture about, but that's what my work is.
Yeah, and trying, to capture that inner essence and to figure out what that means. And you were talking about time and things on loan. So we're starting the slides with this incredible object, which I guess some say is the world's first calculator from about 20,000 years ago, the Ashongo Bone, which is here in Belgium, actually. Maybe can you talk a bit about, your study of archaeology and of anthropology and what this means to you in terms of time?
I think that, we've come to maybe feel that art is a luxury. But actually for our ancestors, it was a tool of survival. And I think it needs to be for us again, if we are indeed going to survive. For me, this bone, which isn't the only bone, there are many examples of bones that have been used as a form of tally, as a form of registration. There's something extraordinary about something that is so old, but that talks about, in a way, thinking about time, about interval, about the fact that, in a way, we experience things in terms of events that succeed one after the other.
Yeah, but not everyone thinks that way. And I think what's really interesting is we're both interested in these different forms of thought process or different forms of organizing the world. And not to spread pseudoscience, because there's nothing proven in this, but there's a really interesting story about this bone where someone was positing that it was a lunar calendar counting 28 days. And suddenly a woman said, like, what kind of man is counting 28 days? Could this be the first fertility calendar? There's no proof, but I think it's interesting, like, what perspective you're coming in really shapes things. Or when we talk about linear time, if we could go to the next slide. So this is a cave, and it's in Guam, which is a Pacific island where my mother comes from. And it is a calendar, but there are 16 dots. So Guam's calendar was 13 lunar months. There's another calendar from a neighboring island that's 16. But under this culture, and in many, also in India, for example, the word kal is the same for yesterday as tomorrow. And here, the past and the future, so if you think about your ancestors, they came before you, but if they're in an afterlife, they're ahead of you. So time is circular. And so I think it's interesting, or when we think about art and history, to think about these different frameworks of experiencing the world.
I like these thoughts. So many non-literary peoples think of the past as the only thing you can see because you're moving into the future but backwards. And I love this image because it's almost identical to the kinds of marks that you find made by Neanderthals in El Castillo in northern Spain. And it is like every one of those dots is, in a way, registering a moment of being, and then, and then, and then.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting, we'll move on, but something that was very formative to the way I think about art or value was, I asked my mother once, like, why we didn't have specific objects all over the house. And she mentioned that actually in our culture, the value is knowing how to make it. It's not in the actual object. And we're going to talk about making a lot as we go into this process, but like making as an act of life, making as an act of survival. Like when you lose that ability to make, you lose so much. Next slide, please. So Antony and I are working on a project together in Bangladesh that we're really excited about. We don't have pictures to show you yet, but it's part of an art festival that has about 500,000 people that visit in 9 days called the Dhaka Art Summit. And it's I guess this kind of joyous encounter with art. And this is an image by the Argentine artist Adrian Villar-Rojas. And if you look at this floor-based sculpture, it's made out of 370 million year old Orthoceras and ammonite fossils, right? So what I love about this is it's also this play of time. Like this, we're looking here at these species that went extinct when the world was a super ocean. This is before Pangea. But it's interesting when we think about, I guess how the planet shapes geology and how sculptors go and shape that in their work. Antony, maybe we can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I think of my work in a way as industrially made fossils. I mean, they are a moment of lived time that have been, as it were, taken out of certainly biological time or even botanical time and sort of inserted into geological time. And I guess my thinking is that we've always had to make models of ourselves in order to understand ourselves. And if we go to the next slide, this is probably the first oldest image of the body in art. And I think it does two things. On the one, it is the registration of the body as a place. You'll say, well, the head looks very small, but in fact, it never had a head. It was worn like an amulet. But what I'm interested in is the indwelling of this object. It's tiny, but it's monumental. And what does it make you feel? It makes you, even me as a man, kind of really think about what it means to be, in a way, a generative space. And the way that this tiny thing was necessary to be made, in a way, in order for there to be an understanding. This isn't about knowledge, an understanding about what it means to be human. And I think we've always needed to make these models of ourselves in order to understand ourselves, and I think that I'm continuing with that tradition.
Absolutely, and all across your career, right? I guess we talk about our bodies as vessels, right? Your vessel is as a tall white man from England. Mine is
Yeah, I'm very unacceptable at the moment. You know. But it's a funny thing, you know. I keep saying, you know, to people that say that there are no women in your art. I just have to say, well, I didn't have a choice about what sex I was going to be born, but I wanted to use, you know, this bit of the material world that I happen to, you know, live inside as my first material, and it's really useful because I can work on it from the inside, from what it feels like, rather than from what it looks like.
Great. Next slide, please. And now we can just let the slides run a bit. So, Antony, this is a cave that you've made in your work, right? So something where you're trying to take others into that experience or into that experience that you felt in your body and trying to make others feel it. Could you maybe talk a bit about...
This is dangerous, in danger of becoming kind of cod psychology, but I think that feeling that you get, certainly in moving into the body of the earth, is a kind of return to origins. And my work is made by being very, very still and sort of going into darkness. But I've also found of recent, you know, in the last 10 years, I've been making these pieces. So this is a work called Cave that I showed at the Royal Academy in 2019 that is a very large body made out of steel that more or less fits into one of the 18th century rooms of that extraordinary institution. But you're invited to go into it. It was important to me that the entry point was actually of the same height to, say, the entrance to a longhouse or a Haidel Tinglet ancestor house, that you have to, in a way, diminish yourself or crouch down in order to make this entry into the house of the ancestor, into the house of memory. But anyway, I think that has become very important to me, to make spaces that in some senses are not just to be looked at from the outside, but actually allow you to enter into them and dwell in them a little while.
No, it's interesting, that thing of entering into something, but also, entering into one's own body, and maybe, these works are also related to the cave in that sense.
Actually, these are me trying to evoke that space inside the body. So this is actually my mouth, but seen, as it were, from the side of the body, looking out through the mouth into light. And then the next one, so these are my knees, and I guess they were for me a kind of registration of that need, I think, in my work to talk about inner experience. And maybe this whole experiment, I mean, I think of all of my work in a sense as an experiment to try to think of the body more as a place than as a thing. And well, maybe I haven't succeeded, and I just keep having to think of new ways of trying to get that across.
So this is also interesting. You have those same entry points and a hollow within. So this is another example of trying to capture that inner space, which is related to the bunker works at Hufkens.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is called base, which is obviously the plinth of a sculpture. But here is, as it were, the body that has gone into the base. But the concrete is the materialization of space, and the body becomes, in a way, void, becomes empty. But you're invited to kind of think about that by reversing the relationship between body and space in relation to the spaces that we're the only animal that chooses to organize our nest in quite this way. Anyway, this is another place, which is 100 works just placed in the sea, and they're disintegrating, but they're not really disintegrating. The reason that I started with that mask is just to show how they've been out there for about 20 years, and basically the surface of the iron is peeling away. But that was another way of kind of getting across this idea that actually, the the changing accidents of appearance are not maybe the point. The point is to be present and to be aware of, in a way, that state of being rather than doing.